computer. Okay, so now I have two mediums going. Nice to see everybody. Um, so, welcome to Native Calgarian. I always want to start in a good way. So, Oki, Nanago, Meko Cheese, Chestako Maki. My name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use she and her pronouns. Native Calgarian is being recorded on the lands of the Niitsitapi, which are the Blackfoot Confederacy. Blackfoot south of the imposed U.S. Canadian border are the Blackfeet. North of the border are the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani of the Confederacy. These lands are Treaty 7, signed September 22nd, 1877, with signatures that include the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Stoney Nakoda, composed of the Wesley, Chiniki, and Bearspaw nations, and the Dene from Tsuut'ina Nation. I acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit, status, and non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands. All non-Indigenous are treaty partners with the Canadian government or British government signing on your behalf. I honor the Blackfoot. I was born in Calgary, or in Blackfoot. Mohkinstsis is Michelle Elliott, another English name, which has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. My mother is Northern Slavey Dene. My father is so Canadian that I am a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution. While having an Indian Act imposed status card, I acknowledge my Dene lineage and that I was born in Calgary, but my family is not part of the Treaty 7 signatories. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Hare people, also called the Great Bear Lake people in Treaty 11. I'm a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene Nation is a visitor to this area of Clincho Tine Indahe in Satu Dene, meaning many horse town, which was named after the Calgary Stampede. Land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer place for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as the guest and honoring your role as a treaty partner. My humblest apologies to the Blackfoot elders and language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. Any mistakes or misinterpretations are on me. I encourage questions so that misunderstandings can be cleared up as soon as possible. I do not speak on behalf of all Indigenous, but I share what I know as I walk down my red road. If you're experiencing emotional distress after anything I talk about today or want to talk, call the First Nation and Inuit Hope for Wellness helpline at 1-855-242-3310. It is toll free and open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And non-Indigenous, there are distress lines in your area too. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. I want to say thank you to my previous donors for already showing your support to my show. If you value listening and can afford to give, thank you. To those who cannot afford to give but listen in, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. I'm also on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. And I want to give a shout out to my super loyal donors: Adam, Alexandria, Beatrice, Brian, Diana, Celine, Jocelyn, Judy, Karen, Kenna, Leah, Marisa, Natalie, Nathan, Rebecca, The Sprawl, Tiffany, Vanessa, and Veronica. So, first, I want to say thanks again for tuning in. It's Mother's Day, and the roots of Mother's Day are focused on peace and justice. And Calgary has a really important day on Wednesday, and tomorrow is the last day for a submission. So, I'm really going live in hopes that somebody is watching this and realizes that as a person with straight cis privilege, or maybe as a person actually marginalized by straight cis privilege, that you might want to put in your submissions, which are welcome from out of town as well, um, to the city website. Now, Katie Lang has posted a link to it. I actually originally seen Hillhurst United Church and Town Rocker, who they are working on Affirming Connections, which is LGBTQ2 plus friendly information for Christianity. And that information is out there because we have, you know, people trying to shut down this resolution that the city is putting forward on Wednesday. But in order to submit, in order to present, the deadline is Monday. So I'm hoping that somebody somewhere is watching this and goes, oh my God, I got to quit watching Michelle and I have to go do my submission immediately to the city of Calgary so that we can ban conversion therapy because it's detrimental to everyone. So I put in a request to talk for 5 minutes. We'll see if they let me speak. So if you are not from Calgary, if you're going to miss Wednesdays, or if I'm unable to speak, I want it to be known what it is I would say to stop this and to ban conversion therapy. Oh, Freudian slip? I think not. So Freud actually was the jerk face that started this whole conversion therapy. So my hope to do a presentation is it'll go like this. Oki, I acknowledge the city of Calgary to be on the lands of the Niitsitapi and this area known as Mokinstis and Clinchotine Indahe in my language. The Indigenous community, which includes the Indigenous Two-Spirit, transgender, LGBTQ community, and straight cis, have faced and continue to face many toxic, trauma-inducing Western interventions, including Western medicine and including Western mental health bias as a result of Western indoctrination and conversion therapy. The gender binary was forced on these lands with a new culture that imposed many things, including English. In my language, we did not have she or he. We only used they and them. In a time of reconciliation, where we acknowledge the harms done to Indigenous people across Turtle Island, we must acknowledge the attempted erasure of Indigenous people and our culture through Western indoctrination, resulting in genocide. Colonial violence, as well as racism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia against women, girls, and 2S, which is Two Spirit, LGBTQIA plus people, have been embedded in everyday life, whether it is through interpersonal forms of violence, through institutions like the healthcare system and the justice system, or in laws, policies, and structures of Canadian society. This The result has been that many Indigenous people have grown up normalized to violence, while Canadian society shows an appalling apathy to addressing the issue. The National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls finds that this amounts to genocide. And this is in their inquiry report, if you haven't seen it before. So, and this, there is a PDF online if you haven't read it. While these conversations are very difficult, they are needed to stop genocide. Oh, I'm like a moron. I just lost my point. There. The everyday violence Indigenous in Calgary are facing. The significance of violence against Indigenous, Two-Spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning, queer, androgynous, and intersectional people in Calgary cannot be understated. I urge all to read the report and implement the 231 calls to justice in the National Inquiry Report with a specific emphasis on pages 447 to 471, understanding distinctive experiences of danger in the lives of Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus people and pathway to violence, lack of will, and insufficient institutional responses, which includes a section on negligent treatment from healthcare providers and reporting gaps in mental health services in Volume 1A. In Volume 1B, the calls to justice specific to Two-Spirit LGBTQ2 plus are 18.1 and all the way to 18.32 on pages 214 to 218, which are also public in page 100 of the executive summary. I want to bring particular focus to Call to Justice 18.17. We call upon all governments, all levels of government, service providers, and educators to fund and support the re-education of communities and individuals who have learned to reject Two-Spirit, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning people, or who deny the importance of history and contemporary place within communities in ceremony and to address transphobia and homophobia in communities, for example, with anti-transphobia and anti-homophobia programs, to ensure cultural access for Two-Spirit, gay, lesbian, transgender, Q plus people. And that's in the executive summary. Continuing the use of conversion therapy in the City of Calgary will be the opposite direction of Call to Justice 18.17 of the National Inquiry Report. Within the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report released in 2015, read and implement the 94 calls to action, which conservatively translated to the White Goose Flying Report for Calgary specific recommendations that have yet to be fully realized. These are calls that all Canadians are to take responsibility and includes understanding, respecting, and listening to the Two-Spirit LGBTQ2+ community. We must ban conversion therapy as a way to show we hear and see their struggles listed in the calls to justice and the calls to action. And then I signed it, Michelle Robinson, Satu Dene, co-chair of the MMIWG2 Calgary Committee, co-founder of Voices, auntie, cousin, and mom to trans and questioning Indigenous family. Yeah, so if you are a regular listener, you know that these issues matter to me. Last year, about this time, I had my cousin Callie on, and this would have been shortly after a family experience of seeing what the shelters are really like for trans youth, and that really impacted me in a really ugly way. But it showed me the need for advocacy when it comes to these issues. So that's my big message today, is that if you consider yourself an ally to Indigenous, that put in your submission and contact the City of Calgary, so that way our Indigenous youth that identifies Two-Spirit, LGBTQ2+, are more protected. For my podcast, I want to say thank you to Vincent for the feedback on getting on Spotify. So there's a process. We put in our submission, and they have to review it to see if we qualify. Now, when I first started this podcast, immediately I was given an 18+ category. Now, I don't know if I've swore yet up to this moment, but I find that hysterically funny because I always attribute that with porn, but I guess I'm just 18+ information. So I'm assuming that's what Spotify is trying to determine, which I'm just going to assume I am, 18+ category. Anyway, it gives me permission to swear and more. Although I don't like to swear because I think that leads down the road of, well, not just poor grammar, but also that bigger picture of like violent language is violence, and I want to avoid that. And another person actually contacted me to tell me that there was like a tick tock in the background of Jesse Went's interview. So as a result of that constructive feedback, we were also able to fix that up. So I'm hoping people will go listen to Jesse and give us some feedback on that. Something I just came across was a call to action reconciliation with Indigenous women in the federal justice and correctional systems, a report of the Standing Committee of the Status of Women. That came out in 2018, but that I hadn't read it quite yet. So I had just shared that if you're interested in learning more. No real conversation about LGBTQ2+ in there though. So that was a bit of a deficit I thought was in there. Anyway, really short podcast today. Again, I'm encouraging everybody to be a good ally if you are straight and cis like me, and contact the city immediately. And if you are non-Indigenous, to read the MMIW inquiry calls to justice on this issue for Two-Spirit and LGBTQ2+ Indigenous people, because I've actually found, and I just want to give a quick shout out to Kevin Allen for, Stories of Gay Calgary, How Our Past Matters. Settler colonial relationships, they tell part of the story, and I'm really hoping that we can start telling all of the story. And the inquiry report actually does tell part of that story, especially if you're unsure how the report is somehow related to issues of LGBTQ2+. It's, again, that intersectional lens that a lot of people miss. Anyway, Indigenous have been talking about the issues, sharing our traumas in reports, commissions, and in public hearings, just so it can be regularly disregarded. No more. Honor the words, honor the treaties, listen to politicians in their policies and platforms. If they do not recognize the marginalized in their budget with Gender Equity Plus, if they are cutting violence prevention programs and services, Indigenous education, uterus health choices, funding for LGBTQ2+, gay straight alliances, know that your vote to that party is directly negatively impacting marginalized people. Demand that they implement The Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, the recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the multiple reports on child welfare reform and violence prevention, and now 231 calls to justice from the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit. Denying those reports is a form of abuse called gaslighting. Our people are experiencing extreme racism in the educational, justice, and health institutions, with multiple reports that say the same thing. Demand change from election platforms and politicians. They do not understand colonialism, racism, privilege, and sexism. They literally have zero business running. It should be understood by all parties and or local politicians, community organizations, nonprofits, sports, churches. A really great article that I said out loud in episode 62 is Truth Before Truth, How Non-Indigenous Canadians Become Allies. Um, I want to continue by putting cultural safety into action so that you can create a safer space for Indigenous people, people of color, those who with a disability, LGBTQ2+. Look at it as first aid for marginalization. Do something. Having good intentions is not enough. Being kind is not going to stop racism, so you're going to have to put a little more effort there. Take action to create change. Speak out against racism, ask questions with those with more understanding, find allies, and create a support system for yourself so that you can advocate for culturally support or culturally safe approaches. Um, Take responsibility for your own learning. Read, reflect. I mean, I'm straight and cis. I'm reading this. I'm reading this. I have multiple books. I have a book club. There's podcasts. There's documentaries. So much information is out there. So take some responsibility for your own learning. Read, reflect, ask questions. Don't always expect this learning to come from Indigenous people, but chances are the moment you try to Google or to ask a question to an Indigenous person, if you were just to copy that and cut it and Google it, I'm sure you would find your answer. Take time for self reflection. Be aware of your own assumptions and biases. And I'll give you an example of that where you constantly assume the government and police have your best interest at heart and then disregard Indigenous people. That's bias. So question your assumptions and biases. Question everything you've learned about Indigenous people and take steps to actively disrupt those stereotypes. Commit to lifelong learning. Be prepared to be uncomfortable. Understanding colonialism and the legacy of racism is an ongoing and difficult task. And you can go to heretohelp.bc.ca, Indigenous People, Volume 11, What is Indigenous Cultural Safety and Why I Should Care About It, if you want to read what I just said. Lateral violence or internalized racism is another form of violence that Indigenous or marginalized people experience by the structure of racism imposed on these lands, like the Indian Act, Indian residential schools, other land clearing policies. Um, there's lots of information on internalized racism if you were to Google it, and I found a really good resource by Donna Bevins for racialequitytools.org. What is internalized racism? Because even I was guilty of internalized racism, and I didn't know what it was. So, um, and I think every person of color that has been raised in white supremacy needs to, really do a lot of self-reflecting on that and understanding, power dynamics. So when you want to shame another person of in your community, there's internalized racism and lateral violence coming from the place of that. Oh, I should give a quick shout out to um, Cowboy Smith. He has Red X Talks. That's another resource for folks that are interested in learning about Indigenous people. If you look up Red X Talks, you'll see Cowboy Smith had put together some wonderful speakers that talk about Indigenous experience from our point of view. Um, Also, I wanted to give a shout out to American Friends Service Committee, who put out a do's and don'ts for bystander intervention so that people who witness racism or any other form of oppressive instances, like in public, so you're seeing somebody saying, hey, you brought this here because we're in COVID-19 times, or, making an trans joke or an Indigenous joke or anything like that. If you witness public instances of racism, anti-Black, anti-Muslim, anti-trans, or other forms of oppressive interpersonal violence and harassment, here are some tips on how to be safer. One, make your presence known. I think that a lot of people, when they recognize that people are paying attention to um, somebody's crap, they assume that they want to be on their side, but they're wrong. Make eye contact with the person being harassed. Ask them if they want support, if you feel comfortable doing so. Move closer to the person being harassed. If you are at risk, of course, don't, but try to create a barrier or create distance between the attacker and the person being harassed. And when I say attacker, I know some people are like thinking fist fights, but sometimes it's just that jerk off who's always given a negative side eye, or all the way to, verbal harassment, and God forbid somebody's punching someone. Do take cues from the person being harassed. Is the person engaging with the harasser or not? Making suggestions. Do you want to walk with me over here? Do you want to move to another train car with me? Would you like for this person to leave you alone? Follow their lead. Notice if the person being harassed is resisting in their own way and honor that. Especially white folks don't tone police the person being harassed. Follow up with the individual being harassed after the incident is over and see if they need anything else. And one thing I always encourage is people to give their business card or write your name and your number to validate their experience. But also, if they do choose to talk about it later or to report it later, you are that witness for that person. Um, do keep both of you safe. Assess your surroundings. Are there other people that you can pull in? Working as a team is a better idea if possible. Just remember, you might be that person is getting targeted by, that you two become a team. So my hope is that you will see the strength in always standing up for another person. Don't call the police. For many communities experiencing harassment right now, the police can actually cause a greater danger for the person being harassed. So, um, low battery. Sorry about that. Don't escalate the situation. The goal is to get the person to safety, not incite further violence from the attacker, and that just might be verbal violence from the attacker. Don't do nothing. Silence is dangerous. It communicates approval and leaves the victim high and dry. Say, like if you're in a meeting and somebody says something really stupid and racist and hurtful, and nobody says anything. What are you communicating to me? That it is okay to be racist in this meeting. If you find yourself too nervous or afraid to speak out, move closer to the person being harassed and communicate your support with your body. Teach your kids about accountability in a positive way, because these kids are learning it from somewhere. If you're experiencing emotional distress and want to talk, call the First Nation and Inuit Hope for Wellness helpline at 1-855-242-3310. It is toll free and open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you are non-Indigenous, there are distress lines that are excited to talk to you. Violence is my everyday reality. Every Indigenous generation has faced it. That's why I started this podcast, to speak freely, without interruption, without tone police, without leadership shaming, without gaslighting questions, as many people don't want to hear Indigenous opinion, but certainly want to tell us theirs. And by people who know nothing about Indigenous, know nothing about colonialism, know nothing about the constant surveillance of Indigenous people, our protests, our vigils, and our rights. Typical microaggressions, people dealing with internalized racism, so they become the gatekeepers that survive off the status quo, or people who are so in their trauma, they stop people from doing the good work and deplete personal resources. External and internal racism is an everyday reality for Indigenous people. That's sad why I needed this podcast, but I needed a boundary to be heard. I want to say thank you to my ancestors, my granny, my mom, of what strength looks like through your example. I want to thank my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt. My stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through your Austrian roots, and for teaching me to be a proud Calgarian. It is through you I am a second generation proud Calgarian. Thank you to my husband Darcy for producing and editing this show, on top of being my husband, my childhood friend, father of our child, and support down my journey of the Red Road. He has witnessed decades of racism and sexism. And to our child, who we are blessed to learn from daily, I am honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. My hope is my daughter, my family will be proud of in the future, trying to discuss these present day issues in a way that they can understand down the road. Again, my Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you to Adam, Alexandria, Beatrice, Brian, Celine, Diana, Jocelyn, Judy, Karen, Kenna, Leah, Marisa, Natalie, Nathan, Rebecca, the Sprawl, Vanessa, Tiffany, and Veronica. Thank you all for signing up. If you did one donation or many and had to leave for or quit for financial reasons, please know I appreciate your support. If you value listening and can afford to give, thank you. For those that cannot afford to give but listen in, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. We are also on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher, and I'm hoping I'll be adding Spotify next week. And I want to end with giving side eye to his Calgary brothers. You're lucky I'm not Tradish. And my beautiful cousin would respond, or you'd be in my dish. Thank you for watching.